A newspaper I picked up in Delicias announced my death in a small, sleepy headline on page 4. It didn't make the front page. Why would it? Who was I? I scanned the article, tripping over the language. We'd been in Chihuahua for 2 weeks. I hadn't picked up much Spanish in that time. There was my name, Lillian Dorsey, and Kurtz and Curran's. Something about murder and Americans. The paper was wrong, but didn't know better. Not even the picture knew better. There in grainy grayscale, a body allegedly mine, the same dark curls and the same ugly ankles. But those were not my ankles. I hadn't left a body behind. See, I had come to be raised by Kurt and his circle. Not in my childhood. No, there. I had a doting, dream-filled mother who named me after Lillian Gish, one of the more popular starlets at the time I was born, in hopes I'd grow up to be on the silver screen myself. And my father was distant and overworked, just like every other father. But it was toward the end of those freedom days, when the world was trying to brainwash me into believing that it was my time to grow up, settle down, learn its ways, when Kurt showed me a different path. At the West End bar, I befriended the only other girl in the place, Pauline. She had her own apartment up there in the Upper West Side and had her shit together, pulled as tight as a belt and a buckle. Her shoes matched the pocketbook and her hair even shone on overcast days. A broke-down, draggled brat trying to rise like a phoenix, I used her as a crutch. I think she liked that I was sort of unruly, like springtime dandelions that poked through the cracks in sidewalks, but could still talk to her about which shade of lipstick flattered her most. She invited me to share her apartment, along with Kurt, Gregory, and Curran, who weren't living there, but never seemed to leave. Someone had to work to pay the bills. Pauline. She had graduated with a degree in English Lit. For this, she had learned how to type, a much more marketable skill. So she left each weekday after a breakfast of black coffee and toast drizzled with honey. Pauline had expected me to contribute, to do the domestic thing at which she excelled. Instead, I sat at the men's feet, a docile, aging girl child, parched for their knowledge, imbibing their words, contemplating the slick mouthfeel of the names they offered up. Rimbaud, Whitman, Blake, names not entirely foreign to me, and others too, Freud, Jung, Parker, and the ideas, Curran's new visions, Gregory's novels, Kurt's experimental energy machines, all mixed with wine and those frenetic bop beats. As a vessel, I took it all in. But the late nights ground me down until Gregory, impish, inebriated Gregory, slipped me a small metal tube. He showed me how to pop it open and slip out the paper wick inside. This I swallowed with a swig of coffee. Benzedrine makes you fly, he grinned, dark eyes wide. Fly? No. But I buzzed all night. Emboldened, I glibly made some comment on Reich's attempt to conflate psychoanalysis, which I never had undergone, and Marxism, which I only vaguely believed in. Kurt, the group's elder by a good 15 years, smiled, almost proprietarily down at me. Had I been sitting closer to him, I think he would have patted me on the shoulder. Well, maybe. If he would deign to touch a woman, that would be me. Or was that wishful thinking? With that one remark on Reich, I had proven myself to him and to the group, and from then on was granted limited participation rights. I knew I could hold my own. They weren't as brilliant as they congratulated themselves for being, but I also knew that they permitted me my voice there in the circle of bodies hemming the roach-infested living room, because I wasn't a threat. That is, I wasn't pretty. Obviously fiction. Pauline could foot the bills for all of us, but the groceries, clean and cook, buy the groceries, clean and cook, but she would never be allowed to talk. Beauty plus brains is too threatening a combination. In a way, I didn't envy her. Pretty girls flooded the streets of New York. Sometimes I thought I was an ugly flash of green in her eyes, and I didn't blame her. But she had Gregory, that is, when he wasn't too drunk, either on wine or writing or getting kicks. All the other little birds who flitted in and out of the apartment, they thought he was tops. So she felt sufficiently recompensed, and we were able to remain friends with little tension. I was the pigeon Kurt came to take under his wing. When the others passed out or melted into the pre-dawn streets, heading back to their Columbia dorm rooms, he and I stayed up, him reading aloud or talking to me, and not in that general proclamation of gospel way he did with the rest. When he finished, I could speak. He would listen while thumbing through one of his books. One night, Gregory creaked out Pauline's room. He paused in the hallway, yawned, and blinked over at us. Kurt had finally taken my hand in his. Oh, it felt so natural. I hadn't realized he had done it until I saw Gregory smirk. Looks like you found your match, eh, Kurt? He winked, groggily combing back his hair before stumbling the rest of the way into the kitchen. It was the first and last time Kurt touched me. I never doubted that I was Kurt's match, intellectually at least. I learned fast, and now that I was sometimes permitted to talk, lobbed back anything he tossed my way. For months, we were platonically inseparable, which meant I saw where his eyes wandered. Curran. Oh, Curran, he was by far the most handsome devil. The women were drawn to Gregory's cocky apple pie poetishness. Curran was the undeniably Ganymede, attracting both men and women. He, the golden boy, the beautiful one, grew used to the lusty looks and the advances. The pranks his friends pulled trying to get him into bed were mostly harmless, so Curran took it all in stride and laughed. What else could he do? Turn away the entire world? He was like me in the sense that he too had been initiated by Kurt. Their families both started out in the Midwest, did well for themselves there, and then with cash in hand moved to New York. Kurt used to babysit Curran, taught him how to clean a shotgun and hunt squirrels. Curran's interest in guns and Kurt waned while Kurt's and him held firm. I told myself Kurt viewed him only as a son, helping me to believe that they were the Bennies, which I had grown quite fond of. As for me, I had a few conversations with Curran. If anyone were full of both piss and party, it was he. Considering me more of a sister, he would dance me around the living room with Kurt watching from his armchair. There was no hope of being anything more to Curran. The girls we saw nestled beneath the nook of his arms were essentially mirrors, collegiate, aureate, with cherry licorice whipped smiles, all of them little Marlena Dietrichs. And Marlene, I certainly was not. Neither was Kurt. Gregory proposed a trip down to Mexico to get the good tea, And the better girls, as he said, while Pauline was at work or for research for my novel, he said, when she was around. I was surprised to find that Kurt agreed to go. Surprised until I learned that Curran was going also. I heard the heat down there made people go crazy. It simmered the brain and made everything turn weird and wrong. Whether I wanted to go or not, I knew I had to go. If I didn't, Kurt would try to recapture. Excuse me. If I didn't, Kurt would try to recapture, he'd call it reconnect, with Curran. And then, where would I be? I swore to myself I'd never return to that position on the floor by Kurt's feet. We packed the car and waved goodbye to Pauline and Sally, Curran's belle de jour. Pauline looked tired and sour, Sally oblivious. Curran blew her kisses from the back seat of the brand new 41 Cadillac convertible Gregory had finagled someone out of. 3 weeks, Pauline screeched to Gregory. That's all you get. Things are going to be different now. Pauline, a week late, was convinced she was pregnant. She was determined to keep the baby and have Gregory raise it with her. Refusing to suffer through it alone, she told him to go get his kicks now, get it out of his system before she started getting sick. I refrained from telling her that Gregory would never be the kind of man she wanted him to be. Pauline was my friend, but what right did I have to say that? Wasn't I going to Mexico, chasing after a man who was chasing after a man of his own? They are who they are. We're only along for the ride, if we're lucky. We could try with all our might to change this, but we'd have better luck moving the earth out of its orbit. We were foolish enough to keep trying. I told Pauline I'd bring her back some turquoise jewelry she liked. Gregory pushed the car up to and beyond its limits as we cut through the Appalachian Mountains' thick fog. We sliced through the south, hopped up on a brutal mix of bennies and cheap wine. Gregory didn't want to sleep, didn't want to stop. He asked Curran to grab the steering wheel when he needed to piss over the side of the car, us in the back seat ducking to miss the spray. The only reprieve from the speed came when we had to stop for gas. I thought southern Texas felt like it was already outside the states. I mentioned this to Kurt. Gregory had been to Mexico once before. He overheard us and called over his shoulder, "No, no, no, smell that? Now that's a mighty fine scent. Dusty with a hint of sweetness, but mostly there's sternness. We mean business aroma. I've got a good nose, but even a mediocre olfactory receptor can detect it. That's America, the smell of America. But that ain't the smell of Mexico, no ma'am. Mexico smells of tortillas cooked over an open fire, juicy, dripping limes and dancing girls. Just you wait, he howled into the wind. To Mexico! Curran raised his fist and parroted, to Mexico! Kurt scowled. Oh, this better be worth it, was all he said. Gregory was right. Crossing the border into Mexico, it was as though the unyielding shell of America cracked open to reveal a pulpy Titian flesh begging to be bitten. Curran ripped off his short-sleeved Oxford shirt, twirled it above his head, and let out a whoop! Only Curran refused to join in on the exclamations as we headed... only Kurt refused to join in on the exclamations as we headed deeper into the maw of the country. Aren't you excited? I pressed him. With his gaze steady on Curran, he murmured, Oh yes, very. Gregory had rented a small apartment above a weather-worn restaurant in the heart of Chihuahua, the city. We can't go hungry here, eh? Gregory said, rubbing his stomach, fully believing that everything he saw before him was his for the taking. We climbed the rickety steps behind the building up to our front door. Inside, A threadbare sofa, a small wooden table, a few wobbly wooden chairs, and in each of the 2 bedrooms, 2 twin-sized beds. "Lily, you bunk with me," Curran said, slipping an arm through mine. To Kurt, he said with a wink, "I'll keep her safe, don't worry." In the room, as he set our suitcases in the closet, I asked, "You don't mind, do you?" He cocked his head toward the living room. "I know I put a damper on his plan to bunk with me, but I couldn't let that happen." "What do you mean?" I blinked. "Don't play dumb, not with me." He shook out the bed sheets. "No scorpions," he confirmed. "We're good for now." "What do you think he intended to do?" "Exactly? I don't know. You've seen him. He gets more desperate. There's no way he'd have come here a year ago. Does he think it's going to be as easy as when I was a little kid?" "He's not that bad." "That depends on how you choose to define bad," Curran said. "Gregory's not the only one who's always hungry, and I'm not going to be Kurt's dinner. He can go throw a few pesos at some Mexican boy." He unsnapped his suitcase, pulled out a small pistol, and slipped it into his boot. "He's not that bad," I repeated in a whisper. "Lil, he is. And if it's up to me, you'll never have to find out that on your own. Can't you see he'll never love you? Not like that. You're too good for him. You deserve to be free." And I asked, "What did he do to you when you were little?" "You don't want to know, and I don't want to talk about it." He threw open the door. "What say we go find some tequila?" And he flashed me a forced grin. Down in the restaurant later that night, Kurt pulled me aside. "You can't room with Curran. We were supposed to be together." "You and I, Kurt?" "I'm flattered," I said, and I kissed the air beside his cheek. "I didn't think you were interested." "I can't say I'd be against it." I lit a cigarette and blew a smoke ring into the air. "But you know how Curran is, always getting what he wants. It's impossible to say no to him." Kurt clenched his jaw. Curran was just as determined as Kurt and had more at stake. Though we shared a room, I rarely saw him, only when he came creeping in during the lilac hours of early morning to change his shirt or grab his camera. At a dance hall, he had found some señorita, a runaway, he told me, with dark curly hair like mine. Those few occasions when he stayed at the apartment, he made sure Kurt knew about her. "She's just some putita, but wow," Curran whistled. "Kurt, you should see her." "I have no interest in seeing her," Kurt said tersely. "Yeah, no kidding." Curran chuckled and winked at me. Kurt spent most of his nights in the city. Was he out scoring morphine? Here the drug was cheap and plentiful, and for Kurt, nearly as seductive as his golden-haired boy. Or was he trailing Curran? Back in New York, I had seen Kurt following him. He never getting caught. Kurt had that kind of stature, light on his feet, phantasmal, able to blend in, be forgotten. He prided himself on being unseen while snaking through city streets. I don't know if I should say something to Kurt or to Curran. What was I trying to accomplish? This was a question I asked myself more and more. What did I want? To make him love me? For him to make me a wife? Every yes I answered to these questions felt like sand on my tongue. Following Kurt to Mexico had been an excuse. Each time I felt unsure in life, I tried to run. That was the pattern. But that was also the answer. Running wasn't a symptom, it was the solution. I thought Kurt's knowledge would lead me to new places, and it did, but I resented being chained to his chair. It hit me that I'd come to Mexico to keep Kurt, but to get myself back from him. We were 2 weeks into our trip. I grabbed my small cardboard suitcase from the closet and headed toward the front door. Gregory, prone on the couch, writing in a notebook, glanced up at me. "Bring back some of those empanadas from downstairs, would ya?" I lifted my hand in a brief wave and left. Outside, I saw a road sign marked Delicias, 91 kilometers. Too delicious, I thought. My stroll turned into a hot, steamy hell. How far was Delicias? Too far. "Mariella!" A frantic voice cried out as a small, older woman burst from the door of a dilapidated tamale shop. "Mariella!" She ran up to me and threw her arms around my neck. She said something as I pulled away from her. "No, no," I said, shaking my head. "No, Mariella!" As she stroked my hair, she repeated what she said. "No habla español." A lanky young man with dark hair and fiery eyes sauntered out of the building. "Mama, no," he said, and then added something I didn't understand. The woman looked back at me, crestfallen. "She thought you were my sister," the man said. "Mariella. She went away a year ago, but she just wrote about a week back from the city. Chihuahua, I mean. She met an Americano, muy guapo. She said she called him Chico de Oro, the golden boy, with hair like sun-dappled fields of wheat." He laughed bitterly. "I guess this gringo is turning my sister into a poet." He said something else to his mother, shaking his head. She responded and turned back to the restaurant. "She said she would invite you in for breakfast, but she's afraid it would break her heart. She fears Mariella is never coming back." He squinted at me. You do look like her. My mother called her Angelita growing up because she was fairer than the rest of us. If you would like some food, I can wrap it up and bring it to you." As I declined the offer, the old woman hobbled back out with a linen bundle. She pushed it at her son and turned, refusing to look at me again. "Please, you must take this," he said, handing it back to me. "It's not much, but my mother is the best cook." Cotton fields stretched out on either side of the city, if I could even call it that. Delicias made Chihuahua look like Manhattan. But you can get lost in small places, and what better way to find yourself than by getting lost? The smell of fresh coffee pulled me into a small diner. I asked the waitress, a girl of about 15, with long, ropey braid down her back, for a café con leche. She yawned and disappeared behind a stucco wall. I spotted a newspaper up on the front counter, so I switched seats. I couldn't read much, so I flipped through the pages, glancing at the pictures. I paused to study one that looked familiar somehow. A sunken sofa. The same sofa from the apartment in Chihuahua. And before it, a woman in a dress, cut like one of mine. Her body sprawled, the head shattered on the floor, the dark curls blood slick. An image like this never would be printed in an American paper. Beneath it, una mujer asesinado en Chihuahua, Americana. Those words I could read. Unable to breathe, I popped open my suitcase, missing one of my dresses and my ID card. Eyeing my open suitcase, the girl set my coffee next to me on the counter. "Hablo inglés?" I asked, steadying my voice. She shook her head and called out, "Juan!" She disappeared again into the kitchen. A moment later, she and a man with graying hair returned. He wiped his hands on a sackcloth. "Can I help you?" I blushed and slid the newspaper over toward him. "Would you be able to tell me what this story says?" He sat down, an empty chair between us, and translated the article out loud. The story, riddled with lies, painted me as Kurt's common-law wife, possibly pregnant and having an affair with Curran. When Kurt learned about the tryst, He shot me in the face with a pistol and fled the scene. Curran found the body and contacted the police, who found Kurt in a bar, too high on junk to remember or deny his involvement. They arrested him. He'd been tried and could be sentenced up to 20 years in a Mexican penitentiary. Juan whistled, looking up from the paper. Love, it should be outlawed, yes? You know them. You know them? The girl in the picture, she is your sister? I shook my head. I thought I might, but I don't. You Americans, you think Americans would have more sense than that, eh? The heat gets to people. Can I get you some food? He asked, standing. I'm not very hungry. I paid for the coffee, grabbed my suitcase, and waved goodbye as I left. Walking back out into the sun, I recalled what Curran had told me back on our first night in Chihuahua. If it's up to me, you'll never have to find out how bad he really is. You deserve to be free. I could see Curran patting himself on the back, thinking himself my gallant knight, though he did it as much for himself, if not more. That poor girl, Mariella. But she wasn't the only one who was dead. I was too, in a way. With death comes rebirth and freedom from my past, my name, and my life of waiting for my chance to speak, for a love that would never come from Kurt and Curran and all of them. I was that phoenix rising, but this time on my own.